Hi, I'm Phileas Dane and I'm the Safari Expert, and this week I'm going to unbox my brand new Canon 100 to 500mm RF lens. But before I do so, some of you might wonder, what did I photograph with before and why did I get rid of it? Well, I'll start at the beginning. Back in the day, I used to photograph with a massive 500mm f4 prime lens, as well as a 70 to 200mm f2.8 lens. And those were obviously very, very high quality lenses. But what I really despised about that combination is, first of all, the fact that I had to choose which camera I'm going to pick up when I see a specific scene. And not only did it take a lot of space on the vehicle, but also while I was traveling. Those of you that use those big prime lenses will know exactly what I mean. So some years ago, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, I decided to get rid of all that gear and to buy myself Canon's 100 to 400mm EF lens, the Mark II, which is one of the best lenses, or best zoom lenses, I should say, that Canon ever produced, especially when it comes to versatility. It's light, it's got a great range, and it's super sharp. And I used that lens on my Canon 5D Mark IV. And that worked really, really well for a long time, until last year, that is, that I basically traded in that old 5D Mark IV for the Canon R6 mirrorless camera. Now, the reason I did this was obviously to get access to that amazing animal eye tracking focus capabilities of the R6, but also the much faster frame rates than my 5D Mark IV. The disadvantage, however, is that the R6's sensor is a lot smaller than that of the 5D Mark IV. So that combination of the Canon 100 to 400mm Mark II lens that I used on the Canon R6 with the help of the adapter always left me a little bit short, or feeling a little bit short, because of course with that small 20 odd megapixel sensor, I couldn't really do a lot of cropping on the R6. And that's where the Canon 100 to 500mm RF lens comes in. It's made for Canon's mirrorless cameras, and it means I don't have to use that little adapter anymore. It certainly is quite a bit more expensive than the 100 to 400, but the big advantage is that extra 100mm. So I now have all the way from 100mm to 500mm. And for me, that is just a massive, massive advantage. In fact, if I look at all the other lens options out there, nothing gives me quite this versatility. Those of you that have been following the channel knows that I absolutely love zooming out and photographing animals in their environment. And that's what I loved about the 100 to 400. When I zoomed out to 100mm on the full frame R6, I could take beautiful photos of animals in the environment. But I always felt that I couldn't get quite close enough for great portraits, especially of birds. But now the fact that I can zoom into 500mm, I think that's going to make all the difference. Now, some of you might wonder that if I was happy to use an adapter, why I didn't just pick up something like a 150 to 600mm lens in the Sigma or the Tamron range. Well, the answer is, I find that 150mm is just not wide enough. Of course, I would have loved for this lens to go all the way to 600, but you can't have everything. Let's open it up, see what's in the box, and most importantly, see how it feels in the hands. Well, as you can see, it's got all the normal, fantastic packaging that you can expect from Canon, with its lovely little zipper bag. It's something that I'll never use in the future again, but once I take it out, I always make sure to put all of this little bag, all the little booklets, whatever straps I don't use, and even the polystyrene and any of the plastic wrappers back in the box, because if you ever want to sell this later on, having everything in its original box is going to get you a better second-hand price. Here we go. Take off some of this wrapper. Look at that. Here she is. There's our little sun cap. Man, they really did wrap it up properly. Now, for those of you that are wondering, I always buy all my equipment from a store called Outdoor Photo in Pretoria here in South Africa. And the reason that I buy everything from them is because it means I can always deal with the same salesperson. And I just know that not only do they charge great rates, but they always give me great after-sales service as well. So here we go. There is our Canon 100 to 500mm RF zoom lens. Now, just my first impressions when I hold it in my hand like this It feels ever so slightly heavier than my 100-400, but in terms of the size, it looks like it's almost exactly the same. I love the fact that it's got this very strong and sturdy footplate, which is something you sometimes find with the cheaper zoom lenses is lacking. And then obviously just the normal cap here in the front, probably a 77 millimeter diameter here in the front, which is the same as my previous lens, which is great because that means I can use my variable ND filter on it. And then of course the little sun cap that'll screw on in the front there. Now, like I said, this zooms from 100 to 500 mils. It's, you know, when it's zoomed out all the way like that, again, it doesn't take up a huge amount of space. It's going to fit on my beanbag absolutely perfectly. And yeah, I'm just terribly, terribly excited to use it out in the field. And I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to go out tomorrow and maybe go to a nearby game reserve like Manyeleti or the Kruger National Park, and perhaps to 1 or 2 other special places next week as well. Show you a little bit of a montage of while I'm taking photographs, and then I'll come back into the office. We'll open up the computer and download a few photos, and we can not only look at the quality of the photographs, but also discuss my first thoughts of how this lens handled in the field on the Canon R6. Over the following week, I had 3 amazing opportunities to test the Canon 100-500 RF lens. It's 7 o'clock in the morning and I've come here to the Manyeleti Game Reserve close to Hoedspruit, and it's going to be the first place to test the 100-500. Let's go on a game drive. You won't believe what we just found. I've got my mom sitting here next to me. She's visiting from the Cape. And we decided to come past the Jackal Plains to look for cheetahs specifically. And way in the distance, I thought, wow, there's 2 cheetahs on a mound. And I looked through the camera and it's actually 2 servals. Can you believe it? Unfortunately, even the 100-500 isn't long enough. They're quite far off the road. But I was able to get a few shots and I'll definitely show you what that looks like. But wow, 2 servals in daytime on a termite mound. Absolutely amazing. Now, one thing at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that I really didn't enjoy having 2 camera bodies, especially with that big 500mm lens, because where do you put them, especially if you've got another person with you in the vehicle? And that's what's so wonderful about this 100-500 on the R6, is it's small enough for me to put on my lap and then I can just shoot hand holding it. And you know, in a situation like this, I don't even need a beanbag. It's light enough for me to shoot out of hand. We didn't see much else in Manyeleti, but a couple of days later, we hit the jackpot when we had an unexpected sighting of a relaxed male leopard 5 minutes from my home in the Hoedspruit Wildlife Estate. It climbed into a tree to get to a half-eaten warthog carcass, giving me the perfect opportunity to test the Canon 100-500 lens after dark. Now, the final destination that I'm visiting to test my new Canon 100-500mm RF lens is Antares Bush Camp here in the Greater Kruger. Now, for those of you that know the channel will know that this is one of my favorite places in the whole Lowveld because of that hide behind me, Umgedi Hide, where I often photograph big herds of elephants. So let's hope we get lucky this time. Now, if you haven't made plans yet for this dry season, do yourself a favor and book a few nights here at Antares. It's a self-catering camp that sleeps 8 people, and you've always got access to this amazing underground hide. So if you love wildlife photography and especially elephants, promise you, you'll love this place. And believe me, it's only going to get better as it gets drier and hotter. I'll leave a link at the top of the video description. Let's go down to the hide. Luckily for us, we had 3 big herds of elephants visiting the hide in less than 24 hours, not to mention a herd of zebras, as well as plenty of birds, providing more than enough opportunities to test my new lens. Let's have a look at the photos back in the office. So the first photograph that I want to show you is the photo that I got of the two servals sitting on the termite mound in the Manyeleti Game Reserve. And I must say I was incredibly surprised and impressed with how well this lens performed. Because typically when you photograph animals at the maximum of the zoom, so in this case 500 millimeters, over a very great distance. In other words, if those animals or birds are really far away, often you struggle a little bit to get sharp photographs. And I know specifically with the 150 to 600 Sigma and Tamron lenses, they really struggle here. Earlier on when we were in Manyeleti, I actually thought they were too far away, but I'm very, very happy with how this shot came out. It's definitely not just a reference shot, but certainly a shot that I will treasure for the rest of my life because the sighting was so rare. So this is an unedited raw file, and as you can see, these little servals were really far away from me, but when I zoom in, I'm really, really impressed with that quality. It's obviously not pin sharp like you would expect with something like a 600mm f4, but I tell you what, for animals that were photographed over about 100 meters at the maximum zoom range of that zoom lens, I'm incredibly impressed with how it came out. That's a massive tick. The second photo that I want to show you is one of the leopard that I was able to photograph here after dark in the Hoedspruit Wildlife Estate. Again, that was a massive surprise to actually see the animal and a wonderful opportunity to test the 100 to 500 after dark. Now, this is the best shot that I was able to get it in the spotlight. It was lying down quite close to us and we were able to light it up properly. Now, this is the unedited raw file. And you can see that the light kind of caught the edge of the bush here, but that's very easy to make a little bit darker. The bit that I'm interested in is the animal's face itself and how sharp it came out. And as you can see when I zoomed in, for a photograph that was taken at ISO 6400 in the dark, I think this came out exceptionally well. Let's do a quick edit. If we go into the develop module, the first thing that I want to do is just use a radial gradient to get rid of this bright bit on the side. So what I'm going to do is just to drag the gradient like this, invert it, and then pull down that bush on the side so that we have a much lighter bit on the leopard itself. And then what we can do is just to use a few of the other sliders like the whites to bring out a little bit of light on the leopard itself. And in fact, I can actually use the brush and just brush a little bit of this area as well and just make that ever so slightly brighter. And then if we warm up the photograph and add a little bit of sharpening as well, there's our final photograph. And I'm sure you'll agree that that is a fantastic result for a 100 to 500mm zoom lens. Just look again how sharp that is when we actually zoom in. Here's another photograph from the same sighting when the leopard was in the tree. Again, I thought it came out incredibly well in the spotlight, and you'll see when I zoom in, we again have very good sharpness for a zoom lens. Just remember that you can't expect a zoom lens like this to perform as well after dark as a 70-200 2.8 or one of the prime lenses like 300, 400 or 500. But I have to say, under these conditions, I was pleasantly surprised. Right, so let's have a look what I was able to photograph from Umgedi Hide at Antares Bush Camp. Now, as you saw earlier in the video, we were very lucky with all the elephant sightings we had. And what I love so much about this lens is that versatility that it gives you. In one moment, you're able to zoom out and get a nice photograph of the herd coming in, and then you can zoom in slightly to start photographing specific individuals. First, a horizontal shot like this, and then a couple of vertical shots like this one. And if you zoom in even closer, you can start photographing some of the elephant's amazing body parts, like their trunks. I absolutely love the curve of the trunk in this photograph. And then obviously things like the tusks. And I also zoomed in onto their feet. And my absolute favorite was zooming in all the way to get some photographs of their trunks as they were splashing around in the water and sipping it up as well. Remember that for all those shots, I never had to change cameras or lenses. I was simply hand holding the 100 to 500 on my Canon R6. Here's another great example at Umgedi Hide where the versatility came in very handy. The small herd of zebra arrived in the morning. Now initially I zoomed out to capture all three of them. Then I zoomed in a little bit to capture one of the individuals that looked straight into the camera. And then I was able to zoom in all the way to get this lovely shot of one of them drinking. Now, one of the biggest reasons that I decided to upgrade from the 100 to 400 to the 100 to 500 were those extra 100 millimeters, which would get me closer to birds. And there was absolutely no shortage of them at Antares. Here are a few of my favorite unedited and uncropped bird photographs that I was able to capture from Umgedi Hide. I was even able to capture this beautiful photograph of a honeybee that came to sit about 2 meters away from me. And you'll see that if we zoom in, the photograph is nice and sharp. So let's quickly summarize and talk about how well this lens performed over the past week. When it comes to sharpness, I'm incredibly impressed. Just look at this photograph of a francolin that was photographed in relatively poor light. If I zoom in, I can't expect anything sharper than this from the Canon 100 to 500. Again, I'm not comparing it with prime lenses, but rather with the sharpness of the 100 to 400 Mark II that I replaced. And if you ask me, it's equal to it, if not better. Versatility-wise, the lens scored a 10 out of 10. It's extremely easy to use, nice and light, and easy to hold for long periods of time without getting tired. And as you saw with those elephant and zebra photographs, when you zoom out all the way, you can capture the whole herd. And if you zoom in a little bit, you can then start photographing individuals, or if you go in a little bit closer, their body parts as well. Now, last but not least, I want to mention focus as well, because that's something that a lot of people are worried about with these longer range zoom lenses. And I have to say, paired with that Canon R6 and the animal eye tracking focus, it performed incredibly well. First of all, just look at this weaver bird that was busy bathing. Despite all these other things that could have stolen the focus, like the mud in the foreground, the stones, the waxbill in the back, and more especially all these droplets around it, because of the animal eye tracking focus, it locked on right to the bird and the photo came out pin sharp. I don't even think you'd be able to get a better result with a prime lens. But where the focus absolutely blew me away was when I was able to capture a fork-tailed drongo coming down to bathe. So I didn't capture him going into the water, but this is the bird coming out of the water. And because of that incredible high frame rate, the 20 frames per second with the electronic shutter, I was able to capture this lovely series of the drongo flying out of the water. The combination of some fast reflexes, the amazing focusing system of the camera and the lens, and then obviously that fast frame rate allowed me to capture these photographs. All in all, I absolutely love my new 100 to 500 millimeter lens, and I can highly recommend that you buy it for wildlife photography, especially if you're using something like an R6, an R7, or even an R5. I'll leave a link in the description to where you can purchase it from Outdoor Photo in Pretoria if you live in South Africa. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and feel free to ask me any questions you might have about the 100 to 500 or even the R6 in the comments below. Until next time.